Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're attempting something of a historiographical high-wire act.
That is definitely one way to put it.
Right, we're calling this one The Forgotten Palindromes of Peace, unpacking Jodocus, Weerd, and Neo-Latin wordplay.
It's a title that really sets the stage for how niche we're getting today.
It really does. No, if you are drawn to the hidden corners of 17th century history, or if you just find yourself fascinated by the bizarre intersection of municipal politics and extreme linguistic constraints, you are absolutely in the right place.
Because we are looking at a very specific type of mind today.
Exactly. We are going to be exploring the life of a Belgian poet and syndic. He was from the Spanish Netherlands, and he commemorated major political shifts, specifically the 12 Years' Truce.
And he didn't just write about it normally.
No, not at all. He did it through incredibly rigorous, just mind-bending Neo-Latin poetry. We're talking chronograms, palindromes, tautograms.
The whole linguistic obstacle course.
Right. And we'll look at his mysterious timeline, his publications from 1609 and 1626, and perhaps most interestingly, the fact that his legacy currently survives as an explicitly tagged Orphan article on Wikipedia.
Which is such a striking detail right out of the gate.
It is. But here's the catch, and the reason I call this a high-wire act. Our source material today is not some sprawling 1,000-page biography.
Yeah.
It is not a newly discovered cache of letters from the Antwerp archives. Our entire universe of facts for this discussion comes from a single, remarkably brief Wikipedia stub.
Extremely brief.
I'm talking under 300 words. When I first pulled this up, I honestly thought, there had been a rendering error on my screen.
I don't blame you. It is sparse in word count, certainly.
Right.
But it is incredibly dense in its implications.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly why this is a worthwhile exercise. We are so accustomed today to having massive data sets at our fingertips.
You really are.
We just expect historical figures to come with exhaustive metadata. You search a name, you get their whole life story. But when we encounter a textual artifact like this, a genuine digital stub, it forces us to slow down. It forces us to act almost like forensic analysts, extracting the context, the geopolitical weight, and the psychological profile hidden inside just a few sentences.
Taking a deep look at forgotten figures forces us to ask critical questions.
Exactly. What does history remember? How does it remember it? And more importantly, what does it let slip through the cracks of the digital infrastructure?
Right.
Because what we see here is the collision of international diplomacy and a near-obsessive dedication to linguistic puzzles, all compressed into a space smaller than a modern social media post.
Which is wild to think about. And that is our mission today. We are going to stress test this tiny document. We are going to extract every ounce of historical and philosophical intrigue from...
Geek it wide open?
Yes. And for you listening, I want you to hold a specific image in your mind as we navigate this. You're deeply familiar with the geopolitical volatility of the Spanish Netherlands in the early 1600s.
You know, the weight of the 80 Years' War.
Exactly. So I want you to imagine operating as a high-level legal official in the middle of that maelstrom, in Antwerp, no less.
A city that had been through absolute hell.
Right. And then choosing to spend your late nights not writing memoirs, not writing straightforward political theory, but executing extreme linguistic gymnastics in a dead language.
That is the psychological baseline of Jodocus de Weerd.
It is. But before we even get into the poetry, we need to address the meta-text of the source itself, because the very first thing we are confronted with is a stark, almost melancholy administrative warning.
It really sets a mood before you even read the first sentence.
It does. The article is flagged, as of August 2024, as an orphan. It explicitly states that no other articles link to it.
Which is a fascinating concept when you stop to think about the architecture of modern knowledge.
Yeah, explain that a bit more.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of digital archivism, Wikipedia is built entirely on the concept of the hyperlink.
Right.
It is a relational database modeled on human association. Its value proposition isn't just the information on a single page, it's how that page connects to the broader web of human history.
It's the web itself.
Precisely. So to be tagged as an orphan is an algorithmic way of saying that within this massive interconnected tapestry of millions of nodes, Jodocus de Weerd is currently an isolated island.
He exists, but there's no path to reach him unless you already know exactly what you were looking for.
Which almost nobody does.
But let me play devil's advocate here. Is it really that profound, or is it just a temporary failure of an indexing algorithm?
How do you mean?
Well, we are talking about a minor 17th century poet. The fact that someone hasn't manually gone in and hyperlinked his name from the main Spanish Netherlands page or the Antwerp page, does that actually reflect his historical irrelevance? Or is it just digital housekeeping that hasn't been done yet?
I would argue it reflects a profound shift in how we validate existence.
Okay, that's a big statement.
Think about it. In the digital age, existence is connectivity. An unlinked page is effectively invisible to the casual browser. Nobody falls down a Wikipedia rabbit hole and accidentally ends up on an Orphan page.
That's a really good point. You have to type his name in directly.
Right. But what makes this specific Orphan status so compelling and, frankly, deeply ironic is what we find when we look at the physical bibliography at the bottom of this very same stub.
Oh, the references section is wild.
It is. He is digitally isolated today, yes. But historically, physically, he was the exact opposite of an orphan.
Yeah, you look at the references and realize this man was tracked across centuries and across borders. The source lists 4 distinct authoritative references.
We'll walk through them.
Okay, so we have an 1876 French source, the Biographie nationale de Belgique.
A major national encyclopedia.
Right. Then we have a highly specific modern German scholarly work from 2019, the Florilegium Neolatinum, compiled by Walther Ludwig.
Which proves modern academic interest in his Neo-Latin work.
Exactly. And going back even further, we have a much older German catalog, the Allgemeines Gelehrten Lexikon from 1751.
Mid-18th century.
Yeah. And finally, we have the General Catalog of Printed Books from the British Museum in London, dated 1965.
So look at that spread.
It's massive. Between 1751 and 2019, in French, German, and English, massive institutional catalogs took the time to validate his existence and document his output.
This raises such an important question about the fragility of modern digital memory compared to the inertia of physical print. For over 2.5 centuries, across multiple European nation-states, librarians, bibliographers, and scholars recognized his necessity in the historical record. He crossed linguistic and national borders in the era of physical typesetting.
Which took real physical effort. It wasn't just a copy-paste job.
Exactly. If you were a scholar in 1965 at the British Museum, Jodocus de Weerd was integrated into your reference system. You could find him through the card catalogs. He was connected.
But in our current, supposedly hyper-connected, omniscient digital ecosystem, that chain of custody has been broken.
The human editors and the bots of the modern age just haven't yet woven his node into the digital tapestry.
And the irony of that disconnection is just staggering when you look at his actual life's work.
Oh, it's almost too perfect.
We're going to get into the weeds of his poetry shortly, but the overarching theme of his literary output was the obsessive construction of hidden connections.
Yes.
He was writing anagrams, acrostics, palindromes. His entire artistic philosophy was about forcing disparate letters and words to link together mathematically and structurally.
He was, in a very literal sense, a human hyperlink for the Latin language.
That is a great way to put it. He dedicated his life to the art of connecting things that do not naturally connect. And now, 400 years later, he is sitting in a database with 0 digital links connecting to him.
It is a poetic tragedy, really. And it asks you, the listener, to pause and consider the architectural stress testing of our own legacy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, what artifacts from today's heavily documented society might end up as orphan stubs centuries from now? We generate unimaginable terabytes of data, intricately cross-referenced profiles.
Every photo is tagged, every post is linked.
Right. But what happens when the underlying platform changes, when the context shifts?
Yeah.
Who among us, despite being validated by various institutions today, will simply become an isolated footnote?
A broken link waiting for a future historian to stumble upon.
Exactly. The digital orphan status of Jodocus de Weerd isn't just a quirk of Wikipedia. It's a mirror reflecting our own precarious relationship with permanence.
That is a haunting way to frame it. Really haunting. But let's move from the metatext to the man himself. Let's look at the actual biographical timeline we have, because even in the handful of dates provided, there is a distinct epistemological gap.
There's a real tension in the timeline.
There is. The text tells us Jodocus de Weerd, who is also recorded under the name Jossie van Weerd, by the way, was born in Antwerp circa 1555 to 1560.
The ambiguity there is standard for the era, but it's worth sitting with for a moment. A 5-year window for his birth in a major economic hub like Antwerp.
That seems like a pretty wide window for someone who ends up being a major city official.
It does, but record-keeping in the mid-16th century, even for families that would eventually send a son to study law, could be notoriously spotty.
Or lost.
Right, more likely. Those parishers' municipal records were lost to the sheer attrition of time, fire, or the intense conflicts that define the region. The iconoclastic fury in 1566, the Spanish fury in 1576 Antwerp saw a lot of destruction.
So the paperwork just goes up in smoke.
Precisely.
But contrast that 5-year ambiguity of his birth with the record of his death. The source states he died on August 4 or 5, 1625.
That is a sudden, sharp focal length.
It is. It isn't sometime in the summer of 1625. It is narrowed down to a 48-hour window.
It's a fascinating juxtaposition. The wide margin of error for his arrival and the razor-thin margin for his departure.
Yeah.
And the physical geography of that departure is also intriguing. The text notes he is said to be buried in the Franciscan monastery in Antwerp.
The phrasing there, said to be buried, always catches my eye in historical texts.
Why is that?
Well, it implies a textual tradition that places him there, but an inability to physically verify it today.
That's exactly right. It suggests that while secondary documents or historical tradition place his remains within that specific monastic enclosure, the physical grave marker itself is likely gone.
Or the primary burial registry of that exact period has been lost or rendered illegible over the centuries.
We have the textual ghost of his burial site, but not the physical proof.
Right. But what bridges that vague birth and that highly specific death is a very distinct career trajectory.
And this is where his mind really starts to take shape for us.
The text establishes that he studied law in Cologne, and by 1609, he was the syndic of Antwerp.
Let's explore that transition, because the leap from a law student in Cologne to the syndic of Antwerp in 1609 is immense.
It's a huge jump. And for an audience familiar with the municipal structures of the period, you know that a syndic wasn't just a mid-level bureaucrat pushing papers.
Far from it.
This was a paramount legal and administrative role. Antwerp in 1609 wasn't some sleepy provincial town. It was a fiercely vital, complex city caught in the crosshairs of the Spanish Habsburgs and the emerging Dutch Republic.
It was a pressure cooker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To be the syndic there meant Jodocus was a person of serious influence. He was the city's legal representative, its advocate, deeply entrenched in the high-stakes political realities of the day.
And we must deeply consider the cognitive foundation of that career. His legal studies in Cologne.
Why Cologne specifically?
Well, Cologne was a massive intellectual center, heavily steeped in Catholic orthodoxy and rigorous academic traditions. But more importantly, if we connect this to the bigger picture of his later poetic obsessions, this detail about studying law is the skeleton key. Legal studies in the late 16th century were not about broad theoretical interpretations of justice. They required an intense, grueling application of logic, rule-bound thinking, and an obsessive attention to the precise placement, morphology, and meaning of words.
Because in a legal document, words are binding.
Exactly. In a legal decree or a municipal contract, a single misplaced Latin suffix could alter the economic fate of a city. It could invalidate a treaty.
I see where you're going with this. You're looking at his day job not just as a source of income, but as the software that programmed his brain.
That is exactly it. His legal training in Cologne wired his cognitive processes for absolute precision and structural rigidity.
So when we look at his poetry, we have to strip away our modern romanticized notions of what a poet is.
We absolutely do. We are not looking at a 19th century romantic wandering through a field of daffodils, capturing unfiltered emotion in free verse.
Right, there's no Wordsworth here.
No. We are looking at highly structured, mathematically exact, rule-bound linguistic architecture. We are witnessing the mind of a rigorous legal scholar applying municipal and contractual rigidity to the art of Neo-Latin poetry.
The lawyer treating a poem like a hermetically sealed legal contract.
Exactly.
I love the clarity of that analogy. And that framework brings us directly to the first of his two known published works, which arrived in a highly significant year.
1609.
Yes. The text tells us that in 1609, he published Concordiae Belgicae Panegyricus Parnassicus.
Just the phonetic weight of that title is magnificent. Concordiae Belgicae Panegyricus Parnassicus.
It really demands to be spoken in a grand hall, doesn't it?
It is.
But let's break down the political context of this publication. The source explicitly notes that this collection celebrates the 12 Years' Truce.
A massively important event.
Huge.
Yeah.
Now, we know the 12 Years' Truce signed in 1609 was a geopolitical earthquake. It was the cessation of open hostilities between the Spanish Empire and the Dutch Republic.
And for a city like Antwerp, this wasn't just abstract politics.
No, Antwerp had been economically and physically battered by the 80 Years' War. The Scheldt River had been blocked, trade was choked, This truce was a municipal lifeline.
What is fascinating here is the intersection of his professional duty and his artistic output.
Right, because of his job.
Exactly. In 1609, Jodocus is the syndic. He is fundamentally responsible for navigating the legal and administrative realities of this new peace for the city of Antwerp.
He's the guy reading the fine print of the truce for the city.
Yes, and in that very same year, he publishes this work. A panegyric is, by definition, a public, formal speech or text of high praise. So the city's top legal mind is actively, publicly documenting and celebrating the truce.
This isn't a private journal entry hidden in a desk drawer.
No, this is a civic leader planting a flag in a historical moment.
But let me push back on that for a second.
Sorry.
If he is the syndic, if his job is municipal administration, why a panegyric? Why not a straightforward legal treatise on the benefits of the truce?
It's a fair question.
Isn't writing an elaborate Latin poem just an exercise in political sycophancy? A way to curry favor with the Habsburg overlords by dressing up their truce in fancy mythological language.
That is a fair critique, and certainly panegyrics throughout history often serve the function of flattering the powerful.
Yeah.
It was part of the political game.
Right.
But we have to look at the publication details provided in the source to understand the cultural weight of this specific work. The text tells us it was published by the Officina Plantiniana apud Ioannem Moratum.
The Planum Press. Under the direction of Jan Moratus?
Yes.
Ah, okay. That changes the calculus significantly.
It really does. The Plantin Press wasn't a corner print shop where you could self-publish a vanity project.
It was legendary.
It was one of the most prestigious, intellectually rigorous printing houses in all of Europe. They published major scientific works, polyglot Bibles, high-level scholarship.
So to be published by the Officina Plantiniana meant your work had been seriously vetted.
It meant it carried significant cultural and intellectual capital. It was a high-status object. The fact that Jan Moratus put his press's name on this indicates that Jodocus's poetry, regardless of how we view the genre of the panegyric today, was treated with absolute seriousness by the intellectual elite of 1609.
So it's less about sycophancy and more about establishing intellectual dominance.
Exactly.
He is using the highest form of linguistic art, printed by the premier publishing house, to validate the political reality of the truth.
And to validate Antwerp's place in it.
Right. But that brings us to the actual mechanics of the poetry itself, which is where this story pivots from an interesting historical footnote into something bordering on the avant-garde.
This is my favorite part.
The source explicitly remembers Jodocus for two strange collections of Neo-Latin poetry. And I appreciate that the encyclopedia uses the word strange, because it is perfectly justified.
This is the most accurate word they could have used.
The text lists the specific types of linguistic constraints he employed. We have chronograms, palindromes, which the source refers to as retrogradus acrostics, anagrams, and tautograms.
This is where we see the legal mind of Cologne truly unleashed upon the Latin language.
It is.
We need to dissect exactly what these constraints entail, especially considering he was executing them in Neo-Latin, the highly polished, revived Latin used by Renaissance scholars.
Let's start with chronograms, because this blew my mind when I really thought about the cognitive load required.
It's intense.
A chronogram is a text where certain letters, specifically those that function as Roman numerals, so I, V, X, L, C, D, M,
Right.
those letters are capitalized or highlighted in the text. And when the reader extracts those specific letters from the sentence and adds their numerical values together, they spell out a specific date or number.
Think about the architectural stress that places on a writer.
It's almost impossible to fathom.
You are writing a poem about the 12 Years' Truce. The grammar must be correct. The vocabulary must be elevated and appropriate for a panegyric.
The meter must hold. You can't just throw the rhythm off.
Exactly. But simultaneously, you have to carefully select your words so that the sum of their Roman numeral letters equals exactly 1609.
You are embedding a cryptographic hash within a poem.
It is a mathematical equation disguised as literature.
It's the 17th century equivalent of writing functional computer code that also happens to rhyme.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you use the word civilis, meaning civil, you've just added a C, a V, two I's, and an L to your math problem. That's 100 plus 5 plus 1 plus 1 plus 50. That's 157 just from one word.
And if you go over 1609, you have to rewrite the whole line.
You have to constantly balance the semantic meaning of the word with its numerical weight. It is an excruciating constraint.
And then we move to what the text calls retrogradus, or palindromes.
Oh boy.
Words, phrases, or entire lines of poetry that read the exact same way, forwards and backwards.
Now, I want to pause here because writing a palindrome in English is a fun parlor trick, right?
Hmm.
A man, a plan, a canal, Panama.
Right, classic.
Race car. But doing it in highly inflected Neo-Latin while discussing European geopolitics.
It's a completely different level of difficulty.
Latin relies on very specific case endings to denote grammatical function. The end of the word dictates its role in the sentence. Is it the subject? Is it the direct object? The suffix tells you.
Exactly.
So if you're writing backwards, the prefix of your first word becomes the suffix of your last word. The morphological gymnastics required to make a Latin sentence mathematically symmetrical while retaining coherent political meaning it's a staggering level of difficulty.
It requires visualizing language not as a linear flow of time, but as a bidirectional physical object.
Yeah, you're looking at the whole sentence at once.
You're reading the flow of time forwards and backwards simultaneously. Then the text mentions acrostics and anagrams.
Acrostics are a bit more familiar to most people.
Right. Acrostics, where the first letters of each line spell out a hidden word or message, are perhaps the most common of these constraints. We see those in ancient literature, too.
But anagrams, taking the letters of a word or phrase and rearranging them to form entirely new words. Again, doing this in Latin requires a profound mastery of the vocabulary.
Imagine taking the Latin name of a Spanish Habsburg general or a Dutch leader and rearranging the exact letters of their name to spell out a phrase praising the peace.
You are literally reordering their identity to fit your political narrative.
You are stripping them down to their alphabetical components and rebuilding them.
That is such a power move.
It really is. And finally, the text lists tautograms. A tautogram is a text where every single word starts with the exact same letter.
This is where I draw a connection to something much more modern. This reminds me of the Oulipo movement in the 20th century.
Ah, yes. Georges Perec.
Writers like Perec, who wrote the novel La Disparition, an entire French novel, without ever using the letter E.
Which is mind-boggling.
It's constraint-based writing. But Jodocus is doing this in 1609. I challenge you listening to this. Sit down and try to write a coherent, politically persuasive paragraph about a current event where every single word begins with the letter P.
You would give up after one sentence.
You would. It strips away your natural vocabulary and forces you to hunt for obscure synonyms. You lose the rhythm of natural speech entirely.
It creates a highly artificial, almost alien form of communication.
It does, which raises an incredibly important question. Perhaps the central question of this entire deep dive.
Why do it?
Yes, why do it? We have established that he is a serious man, a syndic, published by the Plantin Press. He is writing about a massive geopolitical event. Why choose the most bizarre, restrictive, artificial methods possible to record this history?
It's the core mystery of his character.
I am going to play devil's advocate again. Was he just an insufferable pedant?
It's possible.
Was this the ultimate ego trip?
Mm.
You are surrounded by the intellectual elite in Antwerp, the scholars at the Officina Plantiniana. Is writing a tautological panegyric just a way of flexing your sheer intellectual horsepower?
Like a party trick for geniuses.
Yeah, like, look at me. I can solve the Sunday crossword in pen, in Latin, while negotiating a municipal treaty.
I think there is undoubtedly an element of intellectual exhibitionism at play here.
You have to have a certain amount of ego to even attempt it.
Absolutely. These works were puzzles designed to be unraveled and admired by a very specific, highly educated peer group. He wanted Jan Maretis and the other humanists to look at it and marvel at his skill.
Right.
But if we look deeper into the psychology of constraint, I think there is a philosophical, almost existential angle here.
I like the sound of that. Walk me through it.
Think about the world Jodocus lived in. The 80 Years' War was a period of horrific chaos.
Decades of it.
Cities besieged, economies ruined, political alliances shifting violently. The 12 Years' Truce in 1609 was a desperately needed pause, but it was fragile. Everyone knew it was fragile.
The world was messy, unpredictable, and violent.
So you're saying the poetry was a defense mechanism?
I'm not saying you're wrong, but how does a tautogram defend you from an army?
Not physical defense.
Yes.
Psychological defense. In a world defined by political chaos, there is something deeply psychologically comforting about forcing language into absolute, unbreakable rules.
Ah.
A tautogram or a chronogram represents total control over the raw material of reality. You cannot control the armies of the Spanish Empire. You cannot control the shifting borders, but you can control every single syllable and integer in your poem.
It is the legal mind seeking an airtight order that the physical world refuses to provide.
Exactly. The politics of Europe were chaotic, but Jodocus's poetry was mathematically provably perfect.
Seeking order in chaos through extreme linguistic constraint. That is a brilliant way to frame it.
It gives him agency in a situation where he otherwise had very little.
It really does. And it proves that this wasn't just a passing phase for him. It wasn't just a gimmick for 1609, because he maintained this obsession right up until his dying breath.
Yes, which brings us to the final section of our source text.
Right, the section which details his posthumous sequel.
The source notes a second work, published in 1626.
Tell us the title.
Parnassi bispitas de Pascivatatinia, Chronographicis, Retrogradus, Acroskicis, and Anagrammatis explicata.
So even in the title, he's basically listing all his constraints, explained through chronograms, retrogrades, acrostics, and anagrams.
He's doubling down. And again, published by the Officina Plantiniana.
Let's look at the timeline intersection here because it is crucial. The text reminds us that Jodocus died in August 1625.
August 4 or 5, to be precise.
Right. But this second book covers political events in Europe from 1621 to 1625 and is published the year after his death in 1626.
If we connect those dates, the narrative just writes itself.
He was working on it right up to the end.
Jodocus was actively drafting this incredibly complex, puzzle-based Latin poetry right up until the very end of his life. And consider the historical context of those specific years, 1621 to 1625.
The truce ended.
Exactly. The 12 Years' Truce, which he celebrated so exuberantly in 1609, expired in 1621. The region was plunged back into the violence of the 80 Years' War.
So he is literally documenting the collapse of his own city's peace.
Yes.
The truce he celebrated is dead. His region is back at war. His own health is failing as he approaches his death in 1625. And how does he process it?
He doesn't abandon the constraints.
He leans into them. He continues to process the returning chaos through chronograms and retrogrades.
It speaks to a staggering level of psychological endurance, or perhaps obsession.
Definitely upset.
And there is a specific detail in the source about this 1626 publication that I find profoundly revealing about his character.
Which detail?
The text notes that this second book reprints a lightly revised text of the 1609 Panegyricus.
That detail is incredible to me.
It really shows you who he was.
Think about the mindset required to do that. You are nearing the end of your life. Your country is at war again. The truce you wrote about is void. And you decide to go back to a poem you wrote 17 years ago to lightly revise it.
You can just imagine him sitting at his desk in Antwerp in 1624.
Coughing, looking over his old manuscript from 1609 and thinking, you know that anagram in the third stanza is a bit clunky? I think I can optimize the Roman numeral math in this chronogram.
I can get an extra M in there if I change this verb.
Exactly. It shows that these constraints weren't just a gimmick to get published. This was his life's artistic architecture. He was meticulously curating his legacy to the very last moment.
And we also see a significant shift in the thematic scope of his work, as mentioned in the text.
How so?
Well, the 1609 work was fundamentally focused on the Concordiae Belgicae, the Belgian peace. It was a localized regional truce that directly affected his jurisdiction as syndic.
Very focused on his immediate surroundings.
Right. But the 1626 work is explicitly described as covering broader political events in Europe.
So his aperture widens.
Precisely. His worldview, or at least his poetic ambition, expanded. He was no longer just the syndic of Antwerp commenting on local relief.
He's taking on the whole continent.
He was attempting to capture the entirety of the shifting European geopolitical landscape. He's processing the macro-level machinations of empires through the micro-level constraints of acrostics and anagrams.
It's such an ambitious project to undertake on your deathbed.
It really is.
So as we pull back from the intricate details of Latin palindromes and publication dates, what does this all mean?
The big picture.
Yeah. When we look at this entire incredibly brief Wikipedia stub, what is the overarching portrait that emerges of Jodocus de Weerd?
I think we're left with the portrait of a man who lived precisely at the intersection of immense historical forces and hyper-specific personal obsessions.
That's a great summary.
Here was a legally trained mind operating as the syndic of a major European hub, witnessing firsthand the truces and the churn of the 80 Years' War.
He had a front row seat to history.
He did. Yet, He actively chose to process and record this history, not through straightforward legal prose, not through accessible diaries, but through the most rigorous, rule-bound linguistic puzzles available to him.
He synthesized the grand, chaotic scale of European politics with the microscopic mathematical scale of counting syllables and reordering letters.
It is a profound testament to the diverse, sometimes inexplicable ways human beings choose to interact with and document their own historical moments.
It really is. It totally challenges our assumptions about how history should be written or how people in the past experienced their own eras.
We assume everyone was writing grand narratives, but some people were just doing complex math with Latin suffixes.
Exactly. And for you listening, I think the absolute biggest takeaway here is a lesson in historical observation.
Without a doubt.
Think about what we just did. We extracted an entire universe of 17th century municipal politics, the psychology of linguistic constraint, the prestige of the plant and press, and a man's lifelong dedication to cryptographic perfection.
And we did it all from a source text that is less than 300 words long.
It proves that there are no superficial entries in the historical record, only entries we haven't subjected to enough scrutiny.
Exactly. Every single name listed in that German catalog from 1751 or that British Museum record from 1965 belongs to a human being who possessed a full, complex, internally consistent worldview.
They all had their own versions of chronograms and tautograms.
Their own ways of seeking order in their specific chaos.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought to leave you with, circling back to where we began.
The metatext.
Right. At the very top of our source text, the Wikipedia architecture explicitly asks its readers for help. It says, please introduce links to this page from related articles.
The cry of the orphan page.
Jodocus de Weerd spent his entire adult life building intricate, hidden connections. He mathematically linked numbers to letters. He structurally linked the end of a sentence to its beginning.
He conceptually linked the politics of the Spanish Netherlands to the morphology of Neo-Latin.
He was a master architect of connection. Yet today, his digital legacy remains an orphan, waiting for someone to build a bridge.
It is a profound disconnect between the man's art and his current digital reality.
So the thought I leave you with to mull over is this. As we digitize the human experience, as we rely on algorithms to tell us who is connected to whom, what other orphaned lives are out there in the digital ether?
Thousands of them, surely.
What other strange, beautifully complex, constraint-bound works are just sitting quietly in a database somewhere, validated by centuries of physical print, but waiting for someone curious enough today to build a digital link?
Waiting to finally connect their isolated story back to the main tapestry of human history.
A question well worth considering.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep digging into the footnotes.